Good afternoon. My name is April Vollmer. I'm an artist who focuses on woodcut, and I wanted to speak to you today about my life in woodblock, about my book, and about some opportunities for pursuing more woodblock for artists in general. I am an author and a teacher with a master's degree from Hunter College, and I've specialized in mokuhanga since participating in the Nagasawa Art Park program in 2004. My book, Japanese Woodblock Print Workshop on the Contemporary Use of Mokuhanga, was released by Watson Guptill in 2015. And in the center here is a selection of work from across many years, and on the right is the cover of the book. I was very fortunate to have signed a contract for a book with a major publisher back in, must have been 2012. It took 3 years to write. The timing was good because it was before the pandemic and before people knew a whole lot about Japanese woodblock. It was not readily available to creative printmakers in the US or anywhere outside Japan. So I had decided to write this book. I had a wonderful editor, a great designer, and what I didn't realize at the time, it's very important to have publicity. I had a great publicist too. This is the press release on the left. And they distributed the book. They printed 10,000 copies and distributed it to all the major museums, internationally too. It was pretty impressive. And they sent a copy to each of the artists in the book, which I was really pleased with. The book is different from other how-to books in that it includes a lot of artwork by contemporary artists. Here are 3 of my prints. This series is called Zova, and they're each made from 2 blocks printed in various color combinations in different orientations. Graphic designer Nami Kurita selected the center image for the book cover. It's based on a woodcut of elderflowers that I made at a residency in Serbia. I used those blocks to create multiple images of flower patterns in different color combinations. She picked the center one for the cover of the book. I always like to start a talk with a recognition of the amazing people that I've learned from. I had a master's degree from Hunter College, and I worked largely with Vincent Longo, who was notable. He was an abstract painter, but I think he was notable for the way he moved back and forth between printmaking and painting, letting one inform the other. And all his prints were self-carved and self-printed, and related intimately to his approach to painting, with a grid contrasting with more organic shapes. The other person that I am indebted to is teacher Bill Payden, who lived in Japan for many years, married a Japanese woman, and came back to New York and taught mokuhanga at, he taught at NYU for a while, but he gave private lessons, and he's the one who showed me how to do Japanese woodcut. When I was in graduate school, nobody knew anything about Japanese woodcut. It was just a little too specialized for the kind of direct approach that grew out of abstract expressionism. The third person that I owe my life in woodcut to is Keiko Kadota in the middle here. She is the one who invited me to Japan in 2004. She almost didn't invite me because she thought I already knew mokuhanga, which I kind of did. I knew all the technical end, but I hadn't sort of put it in context. And her invitation to work with her program in Japan was really pivotal in my understanding and my commitment to Japanese woodblock. First, a little bit about the vocabulary. I say mokuhanga a lot, meaning water-based woodblock. In Japanese, it actually just means wood and printmaking. Moku means wood and hanga means printmaking. But if you say that in Japanese, it doesn't specify what kind of woodcut. It could be oil-based or water-based. But when I use it in an English context, it sort of implies the traditional form, which is done water-based and printed with a baren. This is the style of printing that developed during the Edo period. So at the top slide there is the top photograph is a baren printing tool. It's about, 5 inches in diameter. They're complicated tools that take the place of a press that we use in the West. Mokuhanga is printed water-based with watercolor, gouache, and sumi ink. This is a picture of the some pigment dispersions from Art Gara that I use. Finally, it's registered with a kento notch cut into the block. On the bottom picture there, you can see a little red outline for a little square. And the paper fits into there and register multiple colors that way. A final aspect of Japanese woodcut is that it's best printed on washi, handmade kozo paper from the inner bark of the mulberry tree. And that's a material that evolved out of Chinese and Korean paper making. It's quite close to Korean. They also use the inner bark of paper mulberry. I'd also like to talk a little bit about the descriptive Japanese terms. Ukiyo is often used interchangeably with mokuhanga, but I'd like to differentiate it from mokuhanga as a description of a period and style rather than a technique. Mokuhanga just means woodcut. Ukiyo refers to prints made during the Tokugawa shogunate. And then that's the Edo period, 1603 to 1868. And those prints were made for a popular audience by groups of specialized craftspeople. There was an artist, a publisher, an artist, a carver, shop of carvers, and a shop of printers. So, and all those specialized craftspeople work together. And that's where most of the prints that you'll see described as Japanese woodcuts are from that period. Shinhanga were prints made also by specialists, expert printers and carvers, but Shinhanga translates as new prints, and the example here is Hiroshi Yoshida. That whole family was very important in the revival of Japanese woodblock during the early 20th century. These are water-based, made by experts, but they're designed primarily for an audience outside Japan. They're designed for sales to the US and other parts of the world. And they reflect a retrospective view of Japan, sort of idealized images of old Japan. There's also a variety of other ones, a lot of travel prints, but they're quite distinct from the old ukiyo-e prints. The third category that I often hear is sosakuhanga, and that's translated as creative prints. And those prints are the most closely connected with Western approach to printmaking of creative prints that were cut and printed by the same artist. And the example I have here is Shiko Munakata, who died in 1975. And this print, it's a huge one too. It must be 6 feet tall. And he carved and printed it all himself. It's technically rather simple, but challenging, obviously, to do something at this scale, and very personal approach. The Japanese have developed special tools for Japanese woodcut. These are a few of the tools that I use. On the left is the printing brushes. The black ones are horsehair, stiff hair designed to push the color across the surface of the block when printing. Big ones for bigger areas and small ones for smaller areas. At the top, there are a variety of goat hair brushes. These are mizubake, meaning water brush, designed for applying water to the paper. You also use them for sizing, but it's a soft, absorbent hair, quite different from the printing brushes. On the right are examples of some of the carving tools. This is a fan beveled chisel. The little ones are called aisuki, and the large one is soainomi. You can see the big one has a ring on the end, and that would be used if you're using a hammer to move the tool through the wood. And that would be important if you're using a harder wood like cherry wood, like they would have used in the large editions they made during when they were making ukiyo-e prints. For the soft wood that contemporary printmakers are generally using, Sheena plywood, it's not really necessary, but some of the better quality tools still have those rings on the end. And in the middle there is the proper way to hold the hangito, the Japanese knife. That knife will carve accurately all the very thin lines that outline areas in ukiyo-e prints. Here's a closer look at the baren. It's a disc made of 2 parts. It's the atagawa, a cup-shaped disc made from layers of washi, and the shin is a coil made from strips of bamboo sheath. So you would strip it and twist it together and coil it up in this to make this spiral. It's kind of bumpy, and then you wrap it with the takanakawa, another sheath, and it's the bumps that force the paper against the inked block to make a print. Here are a few pictures of me in Japan. I was invited in 2004. It was quite astonishing. I mean, I knew the technique from having studied with Bill Payton, but still, it was really different seeing the technique in the context of Japan. And that was part of Keiko Kadota's idea of this residency. She wanted to invite artists not just to learn mokuhanga, but to learn its context and its position in Japanese culture. So the Nagasawa Art Park program was at a little community center in Wajishima, not too far from Kyoto, but rather isolated in the countryside. And we sat on the floor on these tatami mats, and you can see the windows were covered with shoji screens. Very old-fashioned setting. Really special. And I met some amazing people there that I stayed in touch with. I was only there for a couple of weeks. The full program was almost a month. Let's see, so it was In 2011, the program moved from Awajishima to a new location on Lake Kawaguchi, much closer to Tokyo. And I worked there in 2013 on a book residency. So I got to meet the residents there. The photograph here is actually from the Nagasawa Art Park, the top one, and the lower one is the shared studio in at Mokuhanga Innovation Laboratory, MILAB. It was a renovated summer camp on Lake Kawaguchi that we used, and you could walk down to the water with a view of Mount Fuji. It was quite amazing. It was in 2011 that Keiko Kadoda organized the first Mokuhanga conference. So she moved the residency to Lake Kawaguchi, and at the same time organized the first International Mokuhanga Conference, which was something like 100 people. We did the first half in Kyoto, and the second half was in, went back to Awajishima to the Tadao Ando International Conference Center. Fabulous place. Sort of designed for larger conferences than ours, but it was certainly amazing to be able to speak there. The second conference was in Tokyo now, and it took place at Tokyo Gaidai. The open portfolio was in the plaster cast room. I just thought that was such a cool location. Enjoyed that university. And you can see the professional demonstration at the top, and the lower slide is Keiko Hara's exhibition at the conference. A lot of really great exhibitions, wonderful way to share information and see one another's artwork. Here's the third International Mokuhanga Conference. Now, well, what can I say? It was complicated. Keiko Kadoda died just before we had the conference. So it ended up being organized by Donkey Mill primarily. But it was a wonderful conference. Everyone worked together to make it happen. And there were exhibitions and talks, and it's all documented on the website pretty well. And here's just one slide for the third and fourth. The fourth and fifth conferences. One was in Nara, focused on Sumi ink. And the most recent one that happened this April was called Inheritance and Innovation, Mokuhanga Artists Explore Japanese Paper. And it took place in Echizen, again with a change in location of the residency. At this, in 2024, the residency moved from Lake Kawaguchi to Echizen, which is a small paper-making town. And it made it easy for the artists to communicate with the paper makers. And we had a wonderful time visiting with the paper makers. And there were also great exhibitions. This is Ralph Kidgel on the lower left. And on the right, you can see Katsu Yuasa, really good artist who runs a small shop in Tokyo. He organized 8 wonderful exhibitions of Mokuhanga. And then you can see the paper makers. And the candles there, that's how the ink is made, collecting the soot. Yunmi Nam, who I met at Nagasawa Art Park in 2004, the first time I went to Japan. She's now a professor at the University of Kansas and makes conceptually complex and impeccably executed work. She's taught at Anderson Ranch and Women's Studio Workshop and taken students to Japan to study mokuhanga and papermaking. She's very capable, really good artist, and she will organize the next International Mokuhanga Conference in Lawrence, Kansas in 2027. And this is one of her very careful, beautiful mokuhanga prints, and on the left is her working with Keiko Kadota back in 2004. So Yunmi is part of a group called the Mokuhanga Sisters. It's a group of, I don't know how many, 8, 10 women who met at the MILAB Advanced Study Program on when it was on Lake Kawaguchi. And they have organized a huge number of exhibitions and teaching opportunities and different programs having to do with mokuhanga. Oh, they did a zine. So this group is very active. That's a photograph of most of them who were able to come to Japan at their exhibition at the Echizen conference. And they have a mailing list and a website and all that. They're very active. Here's an artist I think a lot of from Poland. Alexander Wozniak has developed a loose personal approach to printing. See, they're kind of printed twice, a little bit off kilter. Amazing artist. And he worked at Karen Kuntz's Constellation Studios a couple of years ago. She has a residency for printmakers that people might be interested in. Keiko Hara is another important figure in mokuhanga woodblock. She's an emeritus professor from Whitman College and incorporates mokuhanga in her ambitious mixed media work. She established the Mokuhanga Project Space in Walla Walla, Washington, and they had several classes with teachers flying in from around the world, and Japan mostly. But the program now offers a short residency, and they also have a lot of exhibitions there. Keiko Hara is an amazing artist and a great organizer who's done a tremendous amount for the mokuhanga community. And no discussion of mokuhanga would be complete without mentioning Yasu Shibata. He studied under Akira Kurosaki at Kyoto Seika University. And now he's a master printer at Pace Editions. And he's famous particularly for working with Helen Frankenthaler. So he knows mokuhanga inside and out, amazing technically, but he also combines it with other techniques in his work with an impressive list of artists at Pace Editions. His own work, recently anyway, is these small reduction blocks that you can see on the right in a variety of colors, very precise. I also have to mention Rebecca Salter, who wrote 2 books about mokuhanga, worth looking her up. They're easy to find on Amazon. I also think it's important to mention her as another painter printmaker. She's a painter who brought her concept of abstraction to woodcut. And I suppose her woodcut influenced her painting as well. But I haven't seen her too much lately. She's very busy. She was elected as the first female president of the Royal Academy in London in 2019. So she's quite busy with that. But you should look up her books. She's a great artist, and her books illuminate a certain aspect of Japanese woodcut. And then there's Takaji Hamanaka. He teaches occasionally. He lives in New York. He learned mokuhanga working at the Adachi workshop in Tokyo and moved to New York City in the 1980s to be a creative artist. He's working on some projects with Adachi now, I think. But he shows his work at Christian Lorello Gallery in New York. And what he does is he prints small color swatches and combines them in these collages. So it's very careful printing on very fine paper, but they're collaged together rather than printed all at once. Oh, did I mention he teaches at Manhattan Graphics, if anybody's in New York. Daniel Heyman teaches at RISD. He attended the Nagasawa Art Park in 2003. I met him at his show in 2004, and I've always been astonished at his energy. He does these amazing woodcuts, and he also takes students to Japan. I think they're mostly students from his RISD teaching, but he has developed a paper-making study program at Awagami in Shikoku. But an amazing artist who works on these large-scale woodcuts. This one may be oil-based. He does both. And my final artist slide is Florence Neal, who does these semi-abstract images of water and tree bark. She's the artistic director of Kentler International Drawing Space. She's displaying her own work here in the flat file room of the gallery, where she sells work on paper with an emphasis on mokuhanga. In addition to traveling exhibitions, twice a year work is selected by the exhibiting artist for a show called Selections from the Flat Files. So if you want to see Woodcut or buy Woodcut, that is a gallery that has a lot of the artists that I've mentioned in the talk can be viewed there. And she has a mailing list. Check the website. And good documentation. I can't stress how important it is to document stuff so that people know what's happened and what's available. She has a very good website. You can sign up to be on her mailing list. So after I learned all this amazing stuff, I wanted to share it. I couldn't believe that this wonderful, flexible technique was not widely available outside Japan. So I started teaching. The upper, clockwise, it starts in Serbia, and then the Lower East Side Print Shop. I taught a lot at the Lower East Side Print Shop. They have great programs. Another place with things you can apply for. And then this is me demonstrating at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden in 2010. I did that for about 20 years. Oh, so many years doing that. And I guess I did it because Bill Payton always thought it was very important to educate people about the special characteristics of Japanese woodcut, because he was aware that it wasn't well known here. Then I have Santa Fe on the right and Maine on the left, and in the middle is a class I gave at Tokyo Gaidai. I was very flattered to be asked to teach there. And a lot of the students, well, most of the students were very sophisticated, and most of them were better artists. Well, not better artists, but better technically than I am. But what they wanted to learn about was my creative process, which is not very Japanese at all, and about what it's like to be an artist in New York. So the class I gave there was more about the idea of being an artist in New York in an international um, situation. For my own work, this is going way back. I wanted to end with a few slides of my own work. This is where I started in the 1980s after I finished graduate school at Hunter College. I worked on a lot of projects that had to do with the environment. Yes, it was a problem. Even back then, people knew that was going to be a big deal. And I addressed environmental concerns by joining a group of artists called Artists for All Species. And we had several exhibitions around the city that brought attention to pollution, habitat loss, and extinction. So these are silk screens on either side that I made at the Lower East Side print shop, where I ended up teaching many years later. The center one is a little installation of watercolor cutouts about plankton. I did a lot of drawing at that period. These are two fish I made. I was starting to think about pattern and nature, and drawing is a great way to play with different ideas and think about what direction to go in. And this was something I did after I finished graduate school. I no longer had a press, so I turned to drawing. I did a lot of drawing, just thinking about stuff. This is the early 90s. And then in 94, I guess it must have been 94, I started my class with Bill Payton. And you can see how immediately the work changed from this black, thoughtful stuff to bright and much more about pattern and color. It gave me so much control over color working with pigment dispersions. So Hunter gave me an interest in abstraction. And I think some of that came through in these more naturalistic images, which were still tied to my obsession with nature and the sort of mathematical, the mathematics that underlies natural form. So these were big ones. I made these three, they're about 3 feet tall, big, ambitious prints. I made these before, no, I started them before Bill. But these were, I made these before I realized how difficult it was to work at this scale. I just did it. Here's an example of using the same plates in various combinations. I started with the one on the upper left, hands holding this wreath form, and then I printed it with a cutout, and then I printed it with 4 up to make a sort of a pinwheel shape. And then on the right, I printed it with mica, so it's shiny. And the lower right is the washi paper dipped in dyed in, I think this was a phthalo blue. I was interested to see what the paper would do, treated in a non-traditional way. I work in pairs a lot for some reason. I'm not exactly sure why. But this is the same 2 blocks printed in different orientations and different colors. One is breathing in, the blue one, condensing, and then breathing out, the red one. And I overprinted them with silver insect pattern. In 2007, I was invited to give a big exhibition at the Brooklyn Botanic Gardens Steinhardt Gallery. after doing demonstrations for many years, uh, they had decided to start an art program, and I was invited to show some of the botanical images that fit in with their garden program. This is Delirious Birds and Bees from 2007. It's an autobiographical print printed from blocks I cut between 1995 and 2007. Blocks from earlier prints gave me a library of shapes to work with, elements to rotate and recombine to generate a new image. And I think this is special. It's not unique. Everybody does all kinds of stuff. But for me, it has been really important to have a library of past work. And these are some of the prints that I saved the blocks of, and I use them in this print, bringing everything together. You can see the cherry is pretty obvious. The one on the left there, the Banksia with hummingbirds, I pulled out the hummingbirds and used that image in this. And I've registered it with a floating kento, a big one, to locate the all the various blocks. You have the bugs, the cherries, the hummingbirds. This is another example of a series created using blocks in various ways. It's the old Willis Avenue Bridge. So initially, the lower left is just the bridge, and then next to it is a slightly larger image with an electrical pylon. And then the main image there is the block printed 4 up with 4 electrical pylons, just creating secondary patterns from the repetition. And then on the left is a flag print that I made from leftover strips of paper. The cormorants love those electrical pylons. They're hanging on strings there. Here's another. This is a block of a silver chandelier that I printed in different contexts. The first one is called Delta, and it's a chandelier superimposed over the Mississippi Delta. I was thinking about, well, that's an environmental disaster, that it's been, the Mississippi has been channelized so much that it has a lot of problems with the water overflow. And this is an image of an intact delta. The middle one is called Blackout, and it's the silver chandelier block, but also the ferns are all printed from a single block in different orientations and different darknesses of color. It's an edition. It's an edition of I think 18, and I had an assistant help me figure out the layout, and we would do, I think there's 20 printings. A crazy project, but we did. But it's just one block. And on the right is another approach. I was working on incorporating digital with woodblock at a residency at Anderson Ranch. That's another opportunity you can look up. It's a wonderful place. And at the time, this was 2011, I was able to work with a technician who helped me print on Japanese paper. so that I could then print woodcut over the Japanese paper. So 3 completely different prints using the same block. The consistency always surprises me. Here's 2001 spider with tiles from San Marco in Italy, in Venice. And the center one is Bites and Kisses from 4 Directions. I think it's the same spider, but different block, different color, different concept. And on the right, Spider Biter is a spider block combined with a laser cut fern block. And I have to say, laser cut saves time in some ways, but in other ways it's very time consuming. I spent a tremendous amount of time adjusting the file of this fern here to get it the way I wanted. And then I had to work with a technician to get the block cut. It was not a quick process, but it resulted in something that I couldn't have done by hand. These prints also incorporate some machine cut blocks. The pattern of crane flies there is from a laser cut block. And it's not a quick process, it's never quick, but it would have been very hard to get the kind of detail and precision of cutting a block by hand. So this series is all on full-size sheets of washi. It's a combining nature and culture and pattern. What can it includes classical fret patterns from 18th century engravings. I'm kind of interested in art history and Greek. I'm interested in all art history, but these are Greek ceramic patterns. Whoops. I rely on photography for reference, and these two are based on the plans of Bramante's circular tempietto in Rome. But then I carve freely, letting the printmaking process shape the image. These 2 prints are made from the same blocks printed in different colors and orientations to make 2 entirely different prints. And I made these at the Virginia Center for Creative Arts, another residency that is a wonderful opportunity to focus on art making for a period. I think I was there for 2 weeks to make this print. Then the pandemic happened. I spent the pandemic in Santa Cruz without a studio and began photographing birds. I was kind of stuck there. I was caregiving for my dad and unable to travel back home. And woodblock is very flexible. You can do it in a small studio. I did a little woodblock, but it was much easier to get a camera and walk along the cliffs and photograph the birds. That was my distraction during the pandemic. That work resulted in a series of photo etching plates. These are very simply printed, black and white on BFK. The photographs are manipulated, combining a lot of architectural plans with the birds, and sometimes doing some rotations and odd things. But basically they're quite straightforward. I worked with a master printer in Spain. And this is one of the few series I did that's not woodcut because of the situation I was in. It was quite exciting to be able to work with a master printer too. She did a wonderful job with these prints. I see a surprising consistency of approach. Bodega Peep from 2000 has the same kind of cutting as the birds I'm carving now, over 20 years later. Mokuhanga is a way to create work that is direct and tactile. The prints record the sharpness of the knife, the texture of the washi, the pressure of the buran, the humidity of the day. The embossment reflects the slant of light at a particular time. I include carving marks or the paper decal to identify the print as a physical object rather than a picture of something else. My most recent work, I've been following through on the bird imagery. And this book was a compilation of I think 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bird images that I printed twice on a piece of paper, washi, and folded it in half to make a book that's like a very condensed package of a lot of looking and a lot of carving. It's called Bird Twins. Finally, this is my most recent work, created at the Mokuhanga Project Space that I mentioned before in Walla Walla, Washington, organized by Keiko Hara. Great residency. They have a variety of programs, but I was invited for a 10-day residency last January. And so these are combinations of my digital photography. These are photographs I took mostly in Italy, combined with woodcut on very thin washi. So finally, I invite you to check out my website, where I've created a new page called Mokuhanga Resources, and there you'll find a list of the residencies and opportunities and various things that I've spoken about during the lecture. You can check there to follow up on things that I've talked about. I'm also very active on Instagram and Facebook. I'm always posting about art and birds and particularly about things related to Mokuhanga. So maybe I'll see you there. And I thank you very much for your attention. Good night.